And welcome back, fellow American patriots and Minutemen, standing at the ready to fight anew for the issues that matter today on this Friday the 13th. And we don't need to watch a horror film of Friday the 13th to understand that we are living in such a hell in this country now, where just one of the dozen or so existential threats to our sovereignty, security, culture, civilization, and economy, just one of them, and that's Islam. We're not even 2% in the direction of solving it. What do you do 5 million Muslim immigrants later? What do you do? I mean, and to be clear, there is no answer to that. It's way too late. Possibly, if we would have done the right thing after 9/11 and shut it off, we could have dealt with it and obviously shut down all the Muslim Brotherhood mosques. But now, what I'm going to show you today is even if we would do everything that should be, and I believe to be within the confines of the Constitution, it wouldn't even put it would put a dent in it, and we need to do it, but we would still have a massive problem. And yet, we don't have a movement or a party that would do a fraction of that. So, number one, it's just important to recognize that, and again, this is just Islam. We didn't get to inflation and Antifa and the tranny attacks and the cultural secularism with marriage in the toilet. I mean, all the problems in this country, healthcare. We're at our 1 Chronicles 12:32 moment. The sons of Issachar, men who understood the times with knowledge of what Israel should do. That at its core is what conservatism is. Understanding the times we live in and what ought to be done with learned experience and principles that have been developed. That's what it is. So if nothing else, we need we need serious men, serious men of wisdom to actually deal with this. From the get-go, like I said, there is no solution without God. Especially with this issue, we are so over the 8 ball, or behind the 8 ball in this case. There's nothing we can do. But you have to have people that try to do what's right and present a plan that at least God could bless and come to fruition. So we don't have time for unserious things. So we don't have time for the same GOP, but at the same time, if all I tell you is, okay, Islam's incompatible with America, which it certainly is. But okay, then what? What are you going to do? Okay, you get your clicks, you get your subscribers, but we really need to deal with this. And as we're watching, 2 attacks yesterday, might have been 3, by the way, from Muslims in America, either let in or from families that were let in that shouldn't have been let in. And then every few days now, it's nonstop. By the way, there's so many more of these attacks that aren't even reported as attacks that we don't even know about. But we just forget about a lot of the big ones. When you think about this, you realize how shallow the SAVE Act is as the ultimate accomplishment that we're driving for. Like, if you think about it, given what's happening, if you had one bullet to fire, shouldn't it be shutting off Islamic immigration, shutting down Muslim Brotherhood mosques? And we're going to talk about what should be in an immigration bill in response to this. The SAVE Act is small ball. Okay, most of these people, by the way, including those who hate our country, they're citizens and they vote and can vote, and the SAVE Act wouldn't save that. So we'll delve into all of that and more. First, I just want to give a shout out. Speaking of those defending Judeo-Christian values in America, Alliance Defending Freedom, they're dedicated. It's a legal ministry dedicated to advancing free speech, religious freedom, the sanctity of life, parental rights, and God's design for marriage and family. They've scored a bunch of victories. They were involved in toppling Roe v. Wade. They were involved in the graphic designer Laurie Smith case, and they're fighting on the tranny stuff, the mail-in abortion drug mifepristone, And by the way, the administration's on the opposite side of them in litigation. So they actually really need your help from now until March 31st. Every dollar you give to ADF will be matched. So 25 becomes 50, 100 becomes 200. Go to joinadf.com/blaze or text blaze, BLAZE, to 83848 to have your gift to ADF matched. So they could continue their godly work by texting again blaze to 83848 or join adf.com/blaze. So, folks, speaking of religious freedom, how could you have religious freedom if you have a death cult in this country that makes it that Christians and Jews cannot freely practice their religion? How is that First Amendment? Do you know how many billions of dollars Jews in America and their institutions now have to spend? But it's churches also, but Jews, I guess, are the number one target of Islam, but that's not their final destination. How much money they have to spend on security to deal with this? Again, my kids go to the same Jewish private school that I went to in Maryland. And, I'm not ancient. This wasn't a long time ago. This wasn't 100 years ago. I went to that school in the 90s, and there was no security. There was no security. Now, what changed? How did that change? How did it change so precipitously? It was really like a matter of 15 years where it sort of just changed. Is it because there was more domestic crime? Was it because of Presbyterians, Calvinists, Lutherans, Catholics, Mennonites, Mormons, Amish? No. It was because we went from Muslims being an insignificant part of the population, about 500,000 or so in 1990, to probably roughly 5.2 million today when you include converts and all the immigrants and those that are born to the immigrants and already here for a while. 5.2 million. We've reached critical mass. It's like clockwork. It is so eerie thinking back to the times where I used to go on Hannity's show to talk about this during Obama's second term when we were experiencing all those attacks and pointing out how Europe had homegrown that was even worse than the immigrants. Rather than assimilating, they actually get more violent because Islam thrives, and increasingly today, more so than when I said it, Islam thrives more in America and Europe than it does in most Middle Eastern countries that are at least starting to clamp down on jihad just for their own purposes. Yet here they thrive. They thrive on it because we let them do whatever they want. It's all good. We bring them in, and then you could chant death to America in your mosques, say whatever you want about Jews and Christians, and it's all good. It's all good. It's all protected. You could have money transferred from foreign terrorist organizations. That's good too. Your mosque leaders and board and imams could be literally tied into Shabab and Hamas and Hezbollah, and that's all good. And this is what you get now. Okay, there is no other reason why every Jewish institution needs that security. And obviously, it was vividly on display, the twin attacks, the Old Dominion University attack, where we have this amazing veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq at the ROTC office, gunned down. By the way, gun-free zone, both federally and at the state level. So he was disarmed. That's a whole nother point. Imagine a guy that was sent overseas to fight stupid wars, gunned down on his own soil at an ROTC recruitment office because we let the problem right in the door. It's just sickening. Sickening. And then, of course, this guy, Muhammad Jalil, shouted Allah Akbar. By now, you guys already know the story. It's a mixture of open borders and jailbreak. He was brought in from Sierra Leone, which we have plenty of people from there we brought in. 2015 went on to fight for ISIS 3 times, was in jail 11 years, but the DOJ recommended 240 months. It was cut in half by a liberal judge, so he was out, goes back to jihad right away. And then we have a naturalized immigrant from Lebanon who lives next door in Dearborn. By the way, if you've ever seen videos from Dearborn, it's scarier than Gaza. Like, it's more radical than anything in the Middle East now. And there's a reason for that. So this guy, Ayman Ghazlia, whatever. So he went in and drove a truck that was full of explosives that could have killed 140 children because it was a synagogue, but it was also a private school at the same time. And thankfully, everyone's talking about the security that killed the guy without any casualties, which is great, but it just underscores the need for it. But why should there be a need for it? Since when do you have a right to come in the country and have terrorist mosques chanting death to everyone? That is not protected. I want to be very clear. That is not protected. And then now the other religions can't practice because of you. And by the way, there was also another one. Trying to find this here. There was a case in Texas. Springs, Texas? Yeah, Spring Elementary School. Muhi Manad Najam, 39 of Klein, Texas, was charged with possession of a prohibited weapon, a third-degree felony, when he came onto the school premises armed with tactical gear. Now, nobody was killed, so this is not going to be listed as a terror attack. But what I'm telling you is there's a lot more of these that aren't even recorded. Meaning, we have a whole litany now that were recorded. You had Nadija Dejane, naturalized from Senegal. Amir Balat, parents naturalized from Turkey. Ayman Ghazali, naturalized from Lebanon. Mohammed Jola, naturalized from Sierra Leone. Ibrahim Kayumi, parents naturalized from Afghanistan. These are the ones just from the past week. And then let's not forget, 29-year-old Ramullah Halalaka, the Afghan dude that entered the U.S. in 2021 and ambushed the 2 West Virginia National Guardsmen in D.C. We forget about that. We forget about the 14 people killed on New Year's last year in New Orleans with the vehicular jihad by Shamsuddin Jabbar. The 2 Israeli embassy workers that were gunned down. That guy was more of like a Hispanic guy, but that was a Free Palestine thing. So that was more Antifa. But then you had Mohammed Sabri Solomon, the Jordanian Egyptian guy that killed a woman in Boulder. I mean, those are just the main ones off the top of my head. But just the last 12 months, there's been a number of them that we've talked about that I can't even recall. And then there's a number of these cases that are kind of viewed as more domestic crime, either because someone wasn't killed or he didn't shout Allah Akbar, and it was thwarted. But it's happening every single week and often every day and often multiple times per day, like yesterday. So the big question is, what do we do about it? What do you do 5 million Muslims later? So again, the first step is to at least be honest and identify the problem. Not lie to ourselves. It's not ISIS. It's not terrorism. It's not one particular terror group. It's not, socioeconomic factors. Obviously not, because a lot of them are even wealthy. It's not radical Islam. It's not even Sharia. I mean, it is Sharia, but Sharia is Islam. It's Islam. Okay? Let's just diagnose the problem, and then we could talk about what we can do within the confines of the Constitution and how that's not going to be enough, and how the Republicans won't even do a fraction of that, and what we know any other generation would obviously have done. There's probably about 5.2 million Muslims. I'd say probably about 4.2 million immigrants and 1 million converts, mainly black converts. Going through the numbers, I'm basically using census data and then 2017 comprehensive Pew report to extrapolate the data. These are very rough numbers. Don't quote me on it, but the rough sketch makes sense. When I say 4.2 million immigrants, I mean they're not native to America, okay? Meaning A lot of them are born here by now, and even their parents might have been born in the case of the earlier ones, but their grandparents weren't. In other words, it's all after World War II, mainly after 1980, and accelerating after, yes, 9/11. That's what we've done to ourselves. That's what I mean by it. And then you have kind of the black native converts. That's what we have. I'm getting that just real briefly to 4.4. The census data from 2020, that's 6 years ago, is 4.45 million. So if you take 2.5% annual growth from the Pew 2017 report that they estimated, that would be about 5.2 million now. And I think that's probably pretty accurate. So you might hear the number 4.5 million, but that's actually outdated. So it's even more than that. And then again, the trajectory of the birth rate and the exceptional amount that we let in under Biden and in recent years, it's going to be exponential. It's going to be a lot more than that very soon. We had about 500,000 to a million in 1990. We had about 2 to 2.2 million or so around 9/11. So, and again, a big part of that was the kind of Farrakhan, they were native. And then the critical mass was after 9/11. So probably roughly 3 million and change since 9/11. Again, don't quote me, but these are pretty good estimates if you want to be rough about it. Rough, crude approximation. Just to understand what we're talking about here, I want to go through some straw men where people say, "Oh, I know of a Muslim that he's not a problem." Like, okay, here's the deal: the difference between Islam and every other real religion is that with Protestants, Catholics, and Jews, and the polling, every poll shows this, the more religious you get into that religion, the more patriotic and pro-American you are. Right? It's actually the more secular you are, the more liberal you are, and the less patriotic you are. But either way, whether you're a liberal or conservative, practicing or not practicing, Catholic, Protestant, or Jew, you're not doing any of this stuff. You're not blowing people up, you're not attacking people, and you're not supporting those who do. Anyone who adheres to the religion, and we're going to bring on a special guest, Danny Burmawi. We've had him on one time before, the convert from Islam to Christianity, and he's going to talk about this. But this is the religion. Now, some people do assimilate and move away from the religion, either officially convert away from it, or they might consider themselves still Muslim. They just don't practice it. Now, what I'm going to tell you is there's 3 concentric circles. How many people are willing to do what these 4 or 5 terrorists have done this past week? Then the answer is endless. Tens of thousands of them, tens of thousands at least, are willing to do that. And that includes a good number born in America. So again, it's not ISIS. It's not, they're not necessarily part of an Iranian terror cell. We definitely have Iranian terror cells and other terror cells, but that's actually a distraction and a downgrade because that's easier to deal with. The problem is freelance jihad. That's an obligation of every Muslim. That is an obligation. Now, some don't take it up, but here's the deal. So you have an endless amount that do that. Then you have the majority of practicing Muslims. You could call me any name you want, but it's a fact, support this. And I would say a super majority support it. And what I mean is support genocidal jihad. Okay? And then nearly 100% of them support the sentiments and mentality behind Free Palestine and they hate America. Okay? In other words, let me say this. There are plenty of people on the right and left that are not Muslim in America that vehemently oppose the military engagement in Iran and think it's a stupid idea or think it's not a good idea, right? That's a debate like anything else. But the question is, how many of them are like in my synagogue on Saturday, we pray for America's soldiers. And in most churches and most synagogues, they do that. How many mosques do they pray for our soldiers? How many mosques do they pray for the Iranians? You see where I'm getting? So that's the foundation. They all don't support us unless they completely move away from it. But if you attend a mosque, I'm sorry, I wish it weren't the case, but they're not patriotic. And they cultivate the climate of jihad. Now, the more some of them that have lived here enough and have been inculcated with enough enlightenment might say, look, I hate America, I hate Israel, I hate this, I support Iran, but, I don't think we should have shootings and suicide bombings in America attacking the church. There is an element of that, but they agree with the sentiment. And then again, the majority agree with doing it, and a massive amount would actually do it. It just most people just don't have the ability, the guts, the whatever, the wherewithal to do it. That is the reality of what we face. By my estimates using Pew, again, don't quote me on this, but out of the 5.2 million, roughly 3.7 million are citizens and 1.5 million are still on green cards or visas. So that means the overwhelming majority are citizens, and out of the 3.7 million, about 1.9 million are probably born here, and 1.8 million are naturalized citizens but came as immigrants. So what needs to be done? We all know that in past generations, we know what they would have done by a mile. If there is ever a time that you could apply the Constitution is not a suicide pact, that you can't apply every constitutional right to something that is going to deny everyone else of their ability to practice their religion without being killed, we know what they would do. But again, Republicans aren't even going to do what I'm suggesting. So you have to pie the corner. What makes the most sense? Obviously, the first thing is shut off all new immigration from these countries. Now, I just want to demonstrate, given the numbers I showed you, my colleague Allie Beth Stuckey made this point. That is now the most moderate thing to do because it barely, even if you shut it all off, now we have 5.2 million here. What are you going to do? But again, Republicans aren't even doing that. Then the next thing is there should be an immigration bill passed that is very, very emphatic in obviously now, by the way, this could be done really through current statute, but all the ones that are not citizens need to go home. Right? That should be obvious. You have no constitutional right to remain here. It doesn't matter what reason we do it. I've said that over and over again. But again, if you don't pass a new thing in Congress, the courts will screw with it. Then again, even if you did pass it in Congress, they'd still screw with it. So if you don't deal with judicial supremacism and say no, we're going to have that problem anyway. Then there is the naturalized. Okay, the naturalized citizens. Now, obviously, it's an endless court process. You're not going to be able to go for the numbers. You have to prioritize the imams. Most of the imams, and a lot of the imams in particular, probably more so than the general population, have not been born here. Some of them have been. And they're either not citizens or are naturalized citizens, but not natural born. If you would do an investigation, you would easily find them at a minimum espousing terror, a lot of them connecting to it. That actually is deportable. Now, we need to clarify law and apply Section 212A3E of the INA that makes a non-citizen deportable for espousing terrorism. We need to apply that to denaturalization, which is absolutely constitutional. Okay, that absolutely, I want to make very clear, that absolutely is constitutional. Let me illustrate this point for a moment. Let me pull this up here. This is a story from 2018. Most Nazis, or almost all of them, are dead by now. But for the last 2 generations, we have caught people that turned out to be Nazis, either in Germany and Poland, wherever else, and they found their way to America after the war. and we find them and we deport them. We denaturalize them and we deported them. And no one ever asked any questions about it. Let me illustrate the point I'm trying to make. In 2018, ICE announced that it had deported Jaku Palij, a 95-year-old Polish immigrant who had been a naturalized citizen for almost 50 years before he was deported. He was denaturalized by DOJ with the help of Nazi hunters. He was discovered that he served as a guard in a Nazi prison camp in Poland. And it took a number of years. This was like in 2002. It took like 15 years to find someone willing to take him because his home was really Ukraine or Poland. They didn't want to take him. Finally, Germany reluctantly agreed to take him. And again, this is section 212A3E they were using, making anyone who participated in the Nazi persecution inadmissible and deportable. But clearly, we applied that retroactively even to someone who was naturalized. Okay? Now, I want to make something very clear. I'm not defending the guy. I'm just trying to illustrate how extreme we believe in justice and carrying out the letter of the law, even when it's an extremely harsh application of it, when we want to do it. And I say this as a Jew, okay? I'm not defending the guy. I'm just saying. Palij was clearly, if you do the math, 18 years old when he was forcibly placed in a prison camp to serve as a guard. He had no choice, was a low-level war criminal. He then lived in America peacefully. No one could argue he never posed a threat and certainly didn't in his 90s. He was a citizen for 50 years. I don't think he had a criminal record. And yet, as a 95-year-old, he was brought out on a stretcher. There's pictures of it, actually. Again, look it up. Jakiw is his first name. Last name, Palij, Palij. And we did that with a number of people. Okay, that always happened. We denaturalized him after 50 years. Here we have an endless litany of people that shout death to America. Imams, regular people, participants that shout death to America, espouse support for the same terror organizations that are in the same section of the INA that makes Nazi membership deportable and even to the point that we denaturalized. Now, again, I think we should pass a law to make this more emphatic. I would argue you could do it under current law and then stand behind it with the courts. This is a much, much bigger deal, graver issue to civilization than the stupid SAVE Act. I'm sorry. It just is. This is what we need to be pushing. That anyone caught espousing terrorism as a citizen, and you begin with the mosques. Now, I know some of you say, well, all of them need to be thrown at. Again, like I'm trying to make it in a way. And here's the thing. Those debating some, most, all, here's what I can tell you. All of the Muslim infrastructure in America, I wish it weren't the case, but it is the case. The mosques, the schools, they're controlled by people that are hooked in with Hamas, Hezbollah, Shabab, the finance network. If DOJ, and here's the important thing because they're pathetic, if every red state attorney's general office would pick up where the Holy Land Foundation trial ended, you will find that they are all roped into that. And you could use current authorities to shut down their mosques and denaturalize and deport all of their leaders. And certainly the ones that aren't even naturalized. Now, I know what a lot of you are going to say. That after everything I told you, and this is shutting off the new, kicking out those without citizenship, taking the naturalized ones and applying it's 212A3F to them, but the same way we apply 212A3E for Nazis, even 95-year-olds that we threw out of the country, and we would still do it. It's just they died off. Right away, The Republicans are never going to do that. But I'm just to understand the magnitude of the problem, you guys do realize that even that, you would still be left with most of the naturalized or a lot of them. And then probably, again, my best estimate is about 1.9 million natural born. That's the magnitude of the problem we have now. And of course, Republicans won't do that. They won't do anything if we don't push them. So I'm sorry, but the SAVE Act is so infinitesimal compared to the magnitude of this issue right here. But I do want to get to our special guest today. So, folks, when discussing Chronicles 12:32, the need for men of the times who know what Israel ought to do, what the people ought to do, our next guest is a great person to turn to. He would know. He would know what ought to be done because Dan Burmawi, he came here from just like these people we're talking about today from Jordan. He lived in Lebanon as well. He grew up a traditional Muslim, except the difference is he came here and he converted to become a Presbyterian Calvinist. And he's here to warn us that we can't misdiagnose the problem. Okay, this is not ISIS or some random group or some radical Islam or this. You have to understand it's Islam itself that we brought in millions and allowed every mosque to open up that is run by people that believe in that. They have to believe in it if they're going to run a mosque. He is the founder of a very important new organization, the Ideological Defense Institute. Boy, does the name say it all. idicenter.org. He also, you can follow him at Dan Burmawi with a Y at the end on Twitter, and he's with us today. Hey, Danny, welcome back, and thanks for joining us again. Really enjoyed you last time.
Thank you, Daniel. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Wow, what a time to be alive, to live in. I was just saying my children go to the same Jewish private school that I grew up in, and I have a little bit of gray hair, but I don't look ancient. This was not a long time ago. This was in the 90s. We had zero security. Zero. It wasn't a thing. And now, tuition's a fortune as it is. The security is just out of control. The amount that
Let
we
me
have
let
to
me
spend.
interrupt you here and just go back 200 years from the 90s. You have the founding fathers writing the Constitution, writing the laws of the United States. The same thing, like your school, you didn't need security. 200 years before that, they didn't need to imagine the threat of Islam because Islam did not exist in America. So I wanted to interrupt you to highlight this point. It's
That
important.
and not only did it not exist, but in the 90s it was in very small numbers. 1991 estimate is 1 million, but now it's fivefold. That is the problem. So right off the bat, I just want to ask you to follow up with what you just said. What do you do when they use your laws against you so that now Jews and Christians can't practice their religion because they're scared if they go to a synagogue or a church, they'll be blown up? What do we do with this?
As I said, the Constitution of the United States and the different laws to counter terrorism are not efficient, not sufficient to deter Islamic Jihad. You need more. Why? Because the current laws, what do they do actually? They threaten the jihadist that if you get caught, not killed, then you will go to prison. So what? These people, they are ready to die. They want to be martyrs. So they are promised paradise full of women and wine. So they don't care. So you need something else, and that's what I'm proposing. Actually, I know that the Western civilization is against capital punishment, but in the Islamic Jihad, in this particular case, you need you need collective. I'm sorry, not capital. collective punishment. What do I mean by that? The terrorist, the attacker, for example, the one who did the attack yesterday, you don't only punish him, he was killed, but if he get caught, you punish his family. You denaturalize them and you deport them. At that, it's like when terrorists, when people who wants to bring the law, the rule of Allah in America and replace the system, when they realize that if they do something stupid, their families, their children, their wives, their brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, they will pay the price. That would deter them. I promise you. This is the only way. I wrote an article yesterday about this. There are two concepts. One is called jalwa in the Islamic majority countries. Jalwa is something that I lived in. I witnessed with my own eyes. So if someone kills someone else from a different tribe, the entire tribe of the killer would be forced to leave their town for 7 years. So collective punishment, I don't care. This is getting out of hand. So yes, collective punishment is the only way to deter these people. The second concept is denaturalization. Just do what a country like Kuwait does. 500,000 people were denaturalized in Kuwait in the just past few decades. Anyone who works against the interest of Kuwait immediately is denaturalized. So yeah, I understand that the United States is a country of laws and rules, and this is the character of the United States. But you are dealing with something exceptional that did not exist when the Constitution was written.
Yep. No, and it's funny. I specifically brought you on in the second half of the show. You didn't hear what my audience just heard in the first half, but to buttress what you're saying, I talked about 7 years ago, and this happened all the time in the preceding 40 years, a 95-year-old Polish guy who was a citizen in amazing standing for 50 years. They discovered that he was a prison guard, low level, and I'm not trying to diminish it, I'm just trying to prove the point. In Poland, he must have been 18 years old, probably forced into it. Yet, you were naturalized. It's in Section 212 of the INA. It's not just that you're inadmissible. We denaturalized the guy 50 years later, and he was brought out on a stretcher to Germany. Poland wouldn't take him. He was brought to Germany. So now that I told you that story, and we did that all the time, by the way, now apply that to what we're seeing here, where, this guy wasn't a threat to anything and never really was. How pervasive is the threat of when we talk about, for example, these two kids from Bucks County, parents one's from Turkey, one's from Afghanistan. We had the Lebanese guy that attacked the synagogue, and then the one from Sierra Leone that attacked the Old Dominion ROTC office. Describe how that would play out in these communities, the denaturalization process.
So, yeah, denaturalization of that attacker alone is not enough. I said that, but I want to emphasize this point. It's not enough. They don't care. You need to do more than that. Now, you might say, well, this is like, what is the justification to denaturalize his family? They are not terrorists. They didn't do anything. Well, actually, they did something to contribute to this problem. When they push for indoctrination, when they so, as I said, denaturalization of the attacker himself is not enough, because the extended family is responsible too for that action. How are they responsible? When they advocate for building Islamic centers, decriminalizing or criminalizing of Islamophobia, they seek scrutiny for their scripture. They make sure that their children, they are indoctrinated enough to carry out such an attack, then they are to be blamed. They are to be blamed. The community is to be blamed. If you start punishing the community, that is that direct community that was responsible for that indoctrination, then other people would learn. They will not do it. So this is just a proposal.
No, and again, I want to make it clear. You and I both know the Constitution is not a suicide pact, and more needs to be done. But what we're talking about, I want to be clear, that is within the confines of law. You're a citizen, right? You're naturalized?
Not yet. No.
Not yet. Okay. The reason why I asked that is because hopefully someday you will take an oath. You swear to abjure all foreign allegiance. See, this is what people don't realize. They're like, well, Daniel, what are you going to do? They're citizens. No. If it's naturalization fraud, is not just lying about the years you're here or whatever, the documentation. Meaning the difference between natural born is natural born. It is what it is. You don't make that oath. Here, it's only contingent on that oath. Describe to me the ability of the average Muslim to swear that allegiance, and do they have that allegiance?
Listen, Islam is a state, and Muslims are dual citizens. Even if they are born in America, they are dual citizen because their loyalty, first and foremost, is to Islam. If a Muslim tells you, no, my loyalty is to America first, then to Islam, they're not Muslims. They just identify with Islam. In Islam, to be a Muslim, your loyalty has to be to Islam, only to Islam. Islam is a state with a constitution called Sharia, foreign policy called Jihad, financial system, the Ummah, the concept of the nation of Muslims. It's a state that is trying to be manifested because it was destroyed in 1924 with the fall of the last Islamic Caliphate. And since then, Muslims are trying to bring it back. Now, the Islamic nation, the Islamic Ummah is a state. And if you're American, if you're French, if you're British, it doesn't matter. You have dual citizenship. So when you pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, I was watching a video just minutes ago before I joined you. I think it was Nick Shirley in Dearborn, Michigan. And he was asking American Muslims, if there is a war between America and, let's say, Iraq, would you fight on the side of the United States? All of them answered, no. In our religion, we cannot fight other Muslims. We cannot join the troops, the forces of the infidels and fight against Muslims. It doesn't work that way. If you look at countries like my country, like Jordan, for example, if you ask a Jordanian, who is closer to you, a Jordanian Christian or an Indonesian Muslim? He would say an Indonesian Muslim. He's my brother in religion. A Jordanian Christian, it's like, this is a made-up country. The British made it up. The nation state is foreign to Islam, is an affront to Islam. So this is a real problem. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to demonize all Muslims. This is not my point. Absolutely not. The majority of Muslims, they probably love America. They work to keep food on the table. They want to build a better future for their children. I'm talking about the ideology itself. If you identify with Islam, if you say Islam is my belief system, Islam informs how I behave, then that constitutes dual citizenship. And not only that, your second citizenship, which is the United States of America, doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. Your first citizenship, your loyalty to Islam, it takes precedent, and it is priority above everything else.
No, so that's the thing. You could have an individual Muslim that maybe has some traditions or whatever, but doesn't really go to mosque. And yeah, there's definitely people like that over time. But here's the problem. In their structure, their entire infrastructure, all the mosques, describe to me what is going on in the mosque. What percentage of mosques do they pray for the success of American soldiers?
I'm sorry. I couldn't like keep
I mean,
myself from
where I go
laughing.
to services, that's what we do. So,
Of course, I go to churches, I go to synagogues, and I know that uh,
so you're,
believers, Christians and Jews, they pray
hey,
for
Danny,
America,
do
pray
you want to
for the
join
American
me at the
soldiers. Of
Capitol? There's going to
course,
be a rally, Patriotic Muslims for America. We're going to this rally
it
against the
doesn't
recent terror
exist. You're
attacks.
making that up. Okay, you're making that up.
Well, so that's my question to you. So, no, the reason why I bring that up, Danny, is because even some people, Republican types, and even some Jewish Republicans I see, they try to finesse this business of, oh, the radicalism or is that. And my question is, if that were true, that it's relegated to a subset of it, why don't you see this outpouring of NGOs and imams and individuals like, whoa, we have a major problem here. We're going to work with the FBI. We got to root this out. This is getting out of control. We love America. Like, I'm not seeing that.
Listen, there are Muslims who try to present themselves as pro-America, pro-West, against radical Islam, all of that. But in reality, within the Islamic communities, they are seen as pragmatists, hypocrites, diplomats. That's it. Because in reality, within the Islamic community, it's not some kind of fringe interpretation or a group of
Yep.
Muslims. No, no, no. This is mainstream Islam. Mainstream Islam. America is the enemy of God. The West is the enemy of God. This is in the Quran. This is in the teachings of Muhammad. If you're not a Muslim, you are the enemy of Allah. Period. If Muslims tell you otherwise, they are lying to you or they're ignorant of what Islam is. That's it. The mayor of Dearborn Heights, who's a Muslim, what did he say today? His comment on the attack yesterday at the synagogue. He said, "Yeah, this guy, Israel killed two of his brothers in Lebanon." That's the problem with moderate Muslims. They always find justification for terrorism, for Islamic Jihad. They call it response to imperialism, Al
Yep.
Qaeda,
Yep.
liberation movement, Hamas. They killed his brothers in Lebanon yesterday.
How many
It's
Muslims in
ridiculous.
America agree with that? That's my question to you. What you just said.
What is that? Come again?
Meaning, yeah, only a certain amount are going to go and do what the guy did and ram a truck or, shoot up a
Yeah,
place.
not more
But
than
yeah, but how
0.0001%.
many
Okay, I agree with
agree?
you.
How many agree with that sentiment that, well, this is the natural response for.
Not many Muslim would agree even with what happened, but they
Interesting.
believe
Okay.
it is through Islam. Okay, we need to understand this. Even though they don't agree, but because they are human beings with a conscience, that's why they wouldn't agree. Not because of Islam, but in spite of Islam. Any Muslim who disagree with terrorism is doing that because he is or she is human
Yep.
beings. That must be understood. The problem is, let me please explain this to your audience because this is very important. The problem with Islam is this. In Islam, there's no way to guarantee salvation. And Islam is all about saving your soul. You want to be saved. Now, the majority of Muslims, they keep trying, to follow the commandments, pray, fast, do everything in order to maybe they will be accepted by Allah. However, there is one solution in Islam, and that solution is jihad. If you die as a martyr, killing infidels, you don't go through that process of responsibility and being held accountable to your actions. It's a clean slate. You go directly to paradise. Now, if that is the teachings of Islam, and it is, mainstream Islam and the Quran, the teachings of Muhammad, everywhere, in every single mosque in the world, this must be taught, okay? that you cannot guarantee salvation except through jihad. If this is true, and it is true, then how many Muslims would snap and decide that I want to save my soul? 0.00001%. That is still 200,000 people. What are we going to do with that number?
What do you exactly? And I just want to build on that. Doesn't that
and Muslims, moderate Muslims, the moderate Muslims, okay, they need to. I'm sorry, they need to shut up and stop calling us Islamophobes when we talk about Islam, because as long as they are calling us bigots, hateful, Islamophobes, they are protecting the same scripture, the same canonical books that keep producing those jihadists.
That's what bothers me. Let's say there's a cancer and you don't like the treatment for it. But are you going to yell all day about the treatment and not the cancer? So you have people like Andy Oglis or others will say Islam is not compatible with America or whatever, and they'll go nuts. But like, okay, there's one thing if you go nuts, but then 50% of the other time, you're going nuts about the jihad and fighting it. But that's all they complain about. And we never see them having a problem with it. And that's where the rubber meets the road.
This is taking advantage of freedom in the West. In the Islamic countries, they wouldn't dare say a word. Listen, Islamic leaders across the world, their actions, their constitutions, their laws admit that Islam is incompatible with everything human, okay? That's why their laws are not Islamic. No Islamic country applies Sharia law to the full. That's just, it's like no Islamic country, period. What do? They apply global laws that were globalized by different institutions like the United Nations, human rights, things like that. Because in Islam, there is no human rights. So let me tell you this. Now, if the mayor of Dearborn Heights lives in a country like Saudi Arabia or Dubai, and that terrorist who attacked the synagogue yesterday attacked Dubai, attacked a school in Dubai or an institution in Dubai, would the mayor of Dearborn Heights dare justify for the terrorist? Absolutely not. He wouldn't. But in America, they dare because they are taking advantage of the freedom in this country. Democracy and freedom are vehicles to be utilized until democracy is gone.
You know, Danny, could I summarize, and I know you got to go in a minute, because I want to summarize what you're saying. I think this is so profound. There's a paradox that I think people are starting to realize that certainly in countries like the UAE, but even in other countries in the Middle East that are considered Muslim countries, ironically, it's not like we're becoming like the Middle East. We're exponentially worse in Europe and America because what you're saying is Islam is its own state. So in Muslim countries, they actually have a state structure that is maybe partially...
This is the same point we started with. Same point.
So that state overrules the Muslim state. But in America, we give them autonomy and say, do what you want. So you have a full, unvarnished, unadulterated Islamic state that you don't have in the Muslim world.
China, think of it this way. China is using the United States laws against the United States for Chinese interest.
Yep.
But China is protected by freedom of religion. Think of it this way. Islam is a state just like China is a state. And it's competing with the United States. Islam is given this impunity, this shield of religion, but it functions as a state, just like China. If you don't understand it this way, you will keep losing ground and you will lose your individual liberties and you will lose your civilization.
Exactly. And that's why all these people on all sides who talk about moderate Islam, they don't understand the irony is that to the extent such a thing does and could exist, it's actually only in the Middle East But here, isn't it true that a place like Dearborn is going to be more hardcore than Amman?
Absolutely. Because if you're a Muslim and you live in a non-Islamic country, you are, according to Islam, I'm not talking about individuals, you are behind the enemy lines. And showing allegiance to Allah is the only way to please Him. It's more important than prayer, than fasting, than anything. You need to show allegiance to Allah. And how do you do that? You become more religious.
And that's become more religious, and therein lies the difference. The more religious a Protestant, Catholic, or Jew becomes, every Pew poll has shown this, they become more patriotic, right? The more you attend services, the more patriotic you are in America. Whereas here, yeah, you could find some that kind of, they're more concerned about their college and their job than Islam. But if you want to keep Islam and you do adhere to it and you go to the mosque, this is what you're dealing with. You got to understand the problem.
In
IDIcenter.org.
Christianity, we have something called born again. You are born again when you become devout, and you just you get new life. That is equal to becoming a terrorist in Islam. The new birth in Christianity is becoming a terrorist in Islam. Of course, not all people who identify with Christianity are born again. Not all Muslims are terrorists. That's it. But you need to understand that the experience is worship, is devotion.
And this explains, by the way, such an important point, because I noticed it in Europe 15 years ago, when I used to be on the radio talking about during the ISIS era, those attacks, with the second generation, those born here, whereas their parents migrated here, they bring the culture, but maybe they're not so into it. They're trying to start their lives. But the American-born children that you would think are better, they rediscover, kind of like a lot of Catholics, they grew up Catholic, but their parents didn't really keep much. So they want to, and there's a big trend now, traditional
what
Catholics.
If they are born on Mars, please? What if they are born on Mars, okay, and decided they want to become religious? Doesn't matter if they're born here or they are naturalized. It doesn't matter. It's about the ideology. It's not about the individuals. You cannot assess 5-6 million Muslims in America or 2 billion Muslims to find out who is really religious, who is jihadist, and who is moderate. You cannot do that. It's like there's no way you can do it.
And it's the wrong
What is
question.
the solution? What is the solution? The ideology itself must be addressed, must be challenged, and then in the United States, Islam should be divided into two parts. The 5% of Islam that is spirituality and whatever, praying, that is allowed, that is a religion. The 95% of Islam that is politics, that is a state, is categorized as a political ideology, just like communism. And people are allowed to attack that 95% as much as they want. That's how you solve this problem. And if anyone is practicing anything connected to the political part, then that person is acting against the interests of the United States, even if he was born here. That's how you solve the problem. But you consider everything to be a religion, and then you cannot touch anyone who is acting against the interests of the United States. You will get this every day. Virginia, New York, Michigan, Texas last month. It's gonna
the
keep
Austin,
happening.
the Austin one. I mean, it's nonstop. There's a lot of them that's not even reported. But anyway, I know you got to run idicenter.org. Check it out. Also, Islam, Israel, and the West, a very important new book at Dan Burmawi on Twitter. We'll definitely have you back. Unfortunately, this is not a problem that's going away. Thanks for what you're doing. Take care. So, folks, again, that was Dan Burmawi. Very unique experience. I mean, I think I agree with most of what he's saying. His central point, I for sure agree with, is just, again, you have to view it as we're viewing it. Oh, well, the Islam, it's like, Christians or Jewish. So it's a First Amendment. But no, it's like China. Would you allow China to set up? Well, we kind of do, but, no one would protest us shutting down Chinese institutions preaching subversion to America. And that's the thing. I mean, yeah, you are free. You want to fast on Ramadan, yeah, like fast for a year. I mean, that would be great. But do what you want. And look, despite my sarcasm, I have said this again. They're the ones who hate. I don't hate. Islamophobic is actually a good word. We fear them for good reason. We don't hate. We want to love everyone. And in fact, I would be much more predisposed to identify with another Abrahamic so-called religion that espouses conservative values and will help, be allies against the pagans and the secularists and the homosexual agenda and whatever. But they're not. That's not what they focus on. They focus on jihad. And that's the point. So there is nothing this is why every Muslim NGO is terrorist. Because you could have an individual Muslim like anything else, like, oh yeah, my parents were Catholic. Oh, I might I might go to mass once a year. I'll go on Christmas. And you have the same thing with Islam. But if you want to keep the religion, there's only one way of doing it. And that was his point of born again. There is a trend now, I think both with evangelicals and with traditional Catholics. It's certainly happening with Jews, particularly after October 7th, of people who grew up secular that are rediscovering their religion. So what does it mean when every other person rediscovers their religion? There's a degree of piety, and they're into their religious practices and religious theology. But if you're going to be a born again Muslim as a second or even third generation, you're going to be as bad or worse than the worst things you have in the Middle East. You're going to be worse than your parents who immigrated here. That is the diagnosis of what is happening. So again, through immigration law, denaturalization law, there's a lot you can do. Through the mosques. All these mosques need to be shut down if the imam or leadership is getting funding or espousing. That is not protected. And then finally, the point he's making is, even if you're natural born, but you do not have the right to chant death to America. One of the things I'm going to go through in the coming days, if you look at the dissents, there's a few of them in Korematsu. Everyone thinks, oh, it's like, you're a citizen, we can't touch you. No, I mean, that was a very specific thing, creating military zones for certain people by virtue of Japanese heritage. But if you look in the way they express it, when you're in a time of war with a state, and Islam is a state, the notion that you can just do whatever you want in these mosques and support whatever you want and espouse whatever you want, and it's not treason, that's simply not rooted in our history. So I like his China analogy there. Again, let me know your comments, questions, concerns. Daniel Horowitz at startmail.com. There is so much more going on in Congress and the states and primaries. Some of it I'll cover in my technocracy in the Substack. But let me know your thoughts. Hope you guys have a safe, terrific weekend. Let's return to God. Let's defeat Islam. Until Monday, God bless you all. Thank you for listening. Chronicles 12:32.